Hey, welcome everybody. It's Friday, 3 o'clock Pacific time. Sorry for the delay. Had a little bit of a glitch with Restream, and so hopefully we're live now. I will verify that on my YouTube channel here to make sure that that is indeed broadcasting. Yeah, so it looks like we're live there. Let's now try LinkedIn. Maybe we're live there. Someone can just give me a chat to let me know whether or not that's actually working. I would appreciate that. Been having some issues with LinkedIn actually accepting the, let's see here. Let's see if this, hey, it's working. Okay, good. We're good. We're solid. So I will continue on today with the stream. So every Friday is Career Happy Hour. What does this allow us to do? Well, every Friday it allows us to stop for a moment and take inventory and say, how did this week go for us? And what could we do differently next week? What did we do well this week? It's kind of like the 5-minute journal. So if you're not familiar with that, just look it up on Google search. And the idea is here, that's a daily thing, the 5-minute or is it 3-minute journal? Anyway, the idea is you would reflect on what's happened this week. What did you do well? What could you do better? How do you feel about what's going on in the economy and everything? And what can you do about it differently next week to feel more productive, more fulfilled, that sort of thing. I don't ever presume, by the way, that any job is 100% wonderful. I think it's an optimization process, meaning we take a look at where we are and how can I make it just a little bit better. So perhaps right now you're only about, 25% satisfied in your company, in your role, whatever it is you're doing. How could you get to 30% or 40% and work your way to 50 and so on? And even in my career, I look back at all the different jobs I've had, and I've had varying levels of, I guess, satisfaction in the roles that I've had. And I'm sure many of you have felt the same way, that you have certain leaders or certain roles or certain companies or times in your career where you felt really fulfilled. And that's really what we're talking about with this session each Friday. And so there's really three things that I typically talk around, three ideas. The first is having a really compelling brand message, meaning who are you really? And that compelling brand message is, you could call it an identity statement, a branding statement, an elevator. It doesn't really matter what you call it, as long as people believe that it's true, and you do too. That's the other side, is you believe in your message, and so do the other people. So it's an authentic, kind of genuine, how would you call it? A noble ambition. You're pursuing noble ambition on behalf of your strengths and what you're trying to accomplish in making contributions in the world. So that's really where everything starts. And then the second thing is have a plan, really, because where you are may not be where you want to be. And there's a place that you want to be that you need to get to. And having a plan to get you there, that would be the second step. So first step, brand; second step, plan. A brand and a plan are great until you actually do something about it. So I could spend all my time building a brand or creating a plan, but do nothing with it. And that's not my hope for you. My hope for you is you take that and actually execute something called networking. And many of us know networking is important. What we don't know is how to use networking to a mutual advantage between us and someone else to further both of our agendas, so to speak, and get both of us benefit. And that's where today's session really is. And the last few sessions have been revolving around this concept of networking. What is it, how to do it, and some examples. And we've been really covering this book here, Harvey Mackay, Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And we're just going through it section by section. Some of these sections were a little beefier than others. And so today we're going to cover section 4. Actually, I call it step 4. Sharpen your edge. And so we're going to cover, about 30, 35 pages. I don't know how long it is, but many of these chapters in this section I looked over are pretty short, one or two pages. So let's jump right into Sharpen Your Edge in Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty by Harvey Mackay. And we start with chapter 19. So I'll read through this. If you have questions, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So just put your questions in there, your observations. If you're following along in the book with me, that's great. But this is a way, truthfully, that you're helping me. This is a way for me to stay accountable, to learn new things. By reading this to you, I actually get to read the book because I don't have a lot of, I'll admit, discipline to read things like this. A book that's 300 pages. Typically, I skim through it, get some ideas, and move on. That's just how I'm wired. So by doing this, I'm helping you and you're helping me. So thank you for that. Chapter 19, the single best vantage point from which to build. Every organization has certain hot button positions that put you in touch with all the powers that be within your community. These positions are as powerful as the CEO's job, and they, unlike the chief executives, are available to newcomers. That's good news. The message here is clear. Don't overlook the possibility of doing well by doing good. Volunteering is the easiest way to add new faces to your network, and it feels great. Yeah, for me, that's like volunteering at the schools or doing something in my local community at the food bank. I mean, whatever it is for you, pick something that means something to you. And right, there's always an and. You can choose where to do it. I think many of us overlook the value of, say, I always recommend people Toastmasters, right? Toastmasters improve your communication skills. Well, there's many Toastmasters you could join. Why not join one at a company you maybe have interest in meeting new people? Maybe there's a new company in town and there's a Toastmasters near that company. I mean, it's up to you which one you choose, but you can be selfless and selfish at the same time and not feel bad about it. Let me tell you about a volunteer position I parlayed into a networking opportunity. Many years ago, I got a call from the chairman of one of our local art institutions. He asked me if I had any interest in serving a 3-year term on the board of directors. He knew I knew zilch about art, and I knew he knew it. My credentials are primarily those of an eager beaver young business type. I was flattered and hesitant. If I accepted, I'd be expected to be an active board member, not a name on the letterhead. It would be tote that barge, lift that bale. No way I could slide. I asked questions, treading water. He answered politely. He seemed a little surprised that I hadn't immediately started crawling through the phone to get to the sign-up sheet. Isn't that, I mean, I've been on the other side of that too, trying to encourage people to volunteer and do things. And sometimes that's a hat in hand opportunity. Sometimes people are ready to volunteer. You just never know. That's why it's kind of you get critical mass by contacting a lot of people. Can I think it over for a few days? He says. He agreed grudgingly. He was already having second thoughts. When I called back, I said, I'd be honored to be on your board, but before I accept, I'd like to ask you a few more questions. See, that in fact, that is a great way to open up the door. And to really, when you're networking, it isn't about you talking all the time. It's about you learning and gathering information. And so by asking somebody if you can ask some questions, you're asking permission to do what it is you're supposed to be doing without talking about yourself. So that's a good tactic regardless of the situation. Of course, was there a hint of sarcasm in his voice? How many members are on your nominating committee? Let's see, 4, I believe, the chair and 3 others. How often do you meet? Twice a year. Look, I know you're not asking me to join because of my knowledge of the art or my Mayflower ancestors, but what I hope you're looking for is to broaden your base of support in the community. Actually, yes, it is something like that. Well, there's one place and only one place where I can do that. That's the nominating committee. I don't quite understand. Why is that? Because the nominating committee controls the lifeblood of the organization. I assume your nominating committee decides the number of board members, the mix, the diversity, who becomes a member, and above all, who the executive committee members, the directors, the officers, like you, will be. I see your point, and I see no reason why not. I accepted. I had asked for enough, but there was a lot more that I left unsaid. After I joined, we began to meet monthly, not semi-annually. At the time, there was a constant flow of high-powered executives moving into our state. Like it or not, we were competing with other civic and charitable organizations for their participation. By meeting monthly, when a new honcho at General Mills or 3M or Pillsbury hit town, we were a step ahead of the competition. That's interesting to think about. Volunteering and nonprofits and that sort of thing are competitors. We were able to snare a lot of the top corporate talent for our board. I also helped expand the membership of the committee from 4 to 10 members. That too is part of the more is better approach. More diversity, more people with a bigger stake in our decisions. I'm proud to say that these changes played a major role in substantially increasing both our attendance and our endowment. Then came the happy accident. Here we go. I didn't realize it when I joined, but being on the nominating committee was the best single launching pad I've ever encountered for my own network. Every time a name came before a group for consideration for board membership or to become an officer or director, we reviewed it. By the time the 10 of us finished the discussion, we knew more about the candidate than about many people I'd known for a lifetime. We knew interests, background, friends, associates, business reputation, organizations, income, level of giving, capacity for work, hobbies, hot buttons. More information came out of these sessions than an FBI check for a cabinet post. And each of the candidates was, by definition, a community leader. No one had to tell me what to do next. My well was dug. The names, the information went into my Rolodex. Now, you have to be cautious about that kind of thing because you are, how would you say it? Getting what might be considered confidential and privileged information. So I would be cautious about adding any kind of thing like that directly into a contact database or use that to leverage your position. I was ready for them. When I met them, I knew in advance where our common interests lay, what to talk about, what not to talk about, the building blocks on which to begin a relationship. All that's natural. I think what we need to be cautious of is being a little too stalkery. The stalker in many of us can be evidenced as a sharing of information. I'm just sharing information that I gathered, and they're like, wow, I didn't know you had that information. That's a little creepy. And so be cautious on how you do that. All as a result of stumbling onto what appears to be nothing more than an obscure bureaucracy, but is, in fact, the most powerful networking engine I've ever encountered. Lesson? You don't need a Harvard MBA, sometimes referred to as a yuppie union card, to find a network that gives you access to important people in your community. The nominating committee of almost any civic organization is an open sesame to your community's leadership. Well, I'd never heard of that. I'd never heard of a nominating committee. So that to me sounds interesting. Now, I've heard of like membership committees or membership recruitment, that sort of thing. But not nominating committee is a new one for me. Mackay's Maxim. Find an outfit to join that recognizes you have something to offer and find out what they can offer you. Contacts, exposure, experience. It's all there in exchange for a little effort. Chapter 20. Muhammad Ali's networking story, how I learned to expand my network. The world is filled with ex-athletes, ex-movie stars, and ex-poles who had their 15 minutes of fame and are now forgotten. Muhammad Ali is one of the handful of execs who not only have retained their celebrity, but have grown even more popular over the years. It was Muhammad Ali who held the torch that lit the Olympic flame in 1996. It was Muhammad Ali who was seated next to President Clinton and his family on the night of his renomination to the presidency. And yet it has been over 15 years since Muhammad Ali stepped into the ring for the last time. Muhammad Ali may well be the most popular and well-known person in the world. Today, he suffers from Parkinson's. As we know, he has since passed. One of the most debilitating diseases. Still, he continues to connect with a public that seldom sees him, but still adores him. How does he do it? On December 2nd, 1975, CBS TV ran a news story about a social service facility for the elderly handicapped that it was about to close for lack of funds. For the next day, a man showed up with a check for $50,000 and a pledge of an additional $50,000. He had no obvious connection to the institution, though he was quoted in the New York Times, December 3rd, 1975, as saying, "I have a soft spot in my heart for old people, especially the handicapped. One day I might be handicapped." 10 days later, this letter to the editor appeared in the Times. The Senior Citizen Center for the Physically Handicapped at 37 Hillside Avenue in Washington Heights, under the auspices of self-help, instituted by Jews from Germany, is attended primarily by Jewish people. If it were closed, 54 people would have no other place to go and be left to their solitude. Miraculously and unexpectedly, the center was saved, not by the UJA, Federation of Jewish Philanthropies, nor by another Jewish organization or wealthy Jews, but by the heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali, the greatest. Inside his heart, large, handsome physique beats a big, soft heart that evidently knows no discrimination for charity. Ali did not have to rescue this program for votes or fame, nor does he need to seek Jewish favors. For tax purposes, he certainly can find enough charitable causes among his black brethren. Ali may just wanted to do a good deed. Ali may want to reciprocate the generous contributions to black causes made by Jewish organizations. Ali demonstrates that minorities should help each other, that we need each other. Ali is a true philanthropist. Signed, Charlotte Wall, New York. When Muhammad's wife, Lonnie, arranged for me to talk to him, she invited me to their home in Berrien Springs, a tiny country town in Michigan. I flew to South Bend and booked a limo and driver for the long ride out to his place. What Lonnie had on the phone called a hideaway turned out to be 88 beautifully landscaped acres. The flowers alone could have handled all the weddings in Michigan. I was met by Howard Bingham, a trusted friend of Muhammad's for 30 years. He is also a talented photographer who had captured some of Muhammad's greatest moments. Bingham ushered me into the champ's office. Muhammad rose from behind the desk to shake my hand. "Hi," he whispered. "I'm Joe Frazier." That set a stage for 6 hours of pure, unadulterated fun and a networking seminar. Muhammad Ali still has the moves, but now he's a performer and not an athlete. As an audience of one, I was privileged to be entertained at a magic show, complete with sleight of hand disappearing coins and hankies and optical illusions. This was nothing new. Muhammad had been doing these tricks for years. He's quite good at it. "Watch my feet," he said. He took 3 steps, turned his back on me, and made himself appear to float 3 inches off the ground. Muhammad may no longer float like a butterfly in the ring. Now he does it as a magician. Once a showman, always a showman. Only the venue has changed. That's interesting. So for those of you who maybe are looking at career change or to do different things, and it's just a different expression of who you are. He still has the 1,000 megawatt smile, and I'm having more fun than anyone else in the place. Look, the strikingly handsome features and physique that made him unique among practitioners of his brutal trade. He has something else too, an essential sweetness in his nature. The Parkinson's disease that has ravaged his body has neither embittered him nor affected his mind. He spends most of each day answering his voluminous fan mail and signing pictures, books, and boxing gloves for charities around the world to help them raise money. It's not uncommon for these items to be auctioned off for as high as $5,000. Probably more than that now. I sat and talked with him a while. He worked his way through a pile of mail, carefully reading every letter, responding to every request. 3 hours whizzed by, time for lunch. Add one more permanent lifetime member to Muhammad's worldwide network. We piled into my limo, but first, Muhammad introduced himself to my driver, who told him his name was Francis. 30 miles later, we rolled into a restaurant. As we were getting out of the car, Muhammad whispered to me, "Tell Francis to join us for lunch." One thing is for sure, when Francis got up in the morning, picked up his worksheet, and read that he was assigned to pick up an envelope salesman from Minnesota for a routine run, he never imagined that he'd been invited by Muhammad Ali to join him for lunch. This is what Muhammad Ali keeps busy doing all day long, every day. First, entertaining his visitors, not with tales from the past, but with new talents. 2, rewarding his fans, not with a brush off, like so many athletes today, but taking pleasure in honoring their requests. 3, showing respect and consideration for everyone, not just the big shots. 4, being generous beyond any expectation of generosity for people of different races and religions than his own. And 5, dealing with his own physical limitations in good spirits with optimism, not with bitterness and self-pity. That's 5 things that you can do in any. That was the networking workshop that Harvey received from Muhammad Ali. Back in 1975, that New York Times reporter asked Muhammad why he had contributed to the home for the elderly, Ali responded, "Service to others is the rent I pay for my room here on earth." He has paid that rent many times over. Muhammad Ali is still the greatest. So here's Muhammad Ali's networking story. Early on in my pro career, I was in Las Vegas to fight Duke Sabalong, a big, tall, tough Hawaiian. Gorgeous George, the wrestler, also was in town for a match. A few days before the fight, Gorgeous George and I were both on the same radio program. They asked me how I thought I would do. I was sure I'd win. And I said, but it was like, I can beat this guy, that sort of thing. Nothing too flamboyant, pretty standard stuff. Then they asked Gorgeous George about his match. He practically tore the microphone out of the announcer's hands. He called himself the greatest wrestler in the world. He started shouting about how he was going to tear the other guy limb from limb, how he was going to kill him, and how he'd cut off his own beautiful blonde hair if the guy beat him. I started thinking to myself, man, this is going to be some fight. I sure got to see this fight, and I did. The place was packed. Thousands and thousands of people paying to see this wrestling match. That was not lost on me. Up to then, I had not been exactly shy when talking about myself. But from then on, I talked a lot more. I now understood I would have to do more than just fight. I had to make people want to see me fight. I had to make people care about what was going to happen. Then they'd tell their friends, and their friends would tell their friends, and the excitement would build. These days, they call it PR or spin. I just call it talking. Get enough people talking to each other about you, and you've got an audience. So I learned how to build a network of promoters, endorsers, and media entertainment kingpins. Building a network is about paying attention to what people want. I was never a slow learner. Let me tell you another story that shows you what I mean. Just after I turned pro, Sports Illustrated did a piece on me, and they sent over a freelance photographer to take pictures. I got to talking with him and asked him who else he worked with. He said Life magazine, which was the largest magazine in the country in those days. I sure wanted to be in Life, but the photographer told me I didn't have a chance. But I knew if I could make myself stand out, be memorable, I'd make my own chance. Isn't that great? So here's the thing. If you stand out and be memorable, I'd make my own chance. That's called a brand, right? And so the personal brand that Muhammad had was a commitment to speaking about things and being memorable. And so let it go. I let it go for a few minutes. Then I asked him what kind of pictures he took. He said all kinds, but his specialty was underwater photography. So I said to him, I'm the only fighter in the world who trains underwater. It's like wearing heavy shoes when you do road work so that your feet feel lighter and faster when you put on your other shoes. When you're practice punching underwater with all that resistance, it makes your hands go faster. That's why I'm the fastest heavyweight fighter in the world. Well, he got real interested. So I said that I'd give Life an exclusive if they wanted to do a story about it. Sure enough, they did. So I got to the pool up to my neck and threw some punches underwater. I think what you realize there is Muhammad asked a question, right? He said, what kind of photography do you do? How did you get into this business, right? This isn't me talking about me. This is me asking questions about them from a genuine position of interest. And so that's how he broke down the barriers and then got the opportunity. Let's see. It was quite an experience because I couldn't swim a stroke and I'd never thrown a punch in the water in my life before then. But they took it very seriously and did a whole big spread on it in Life magazine. Let's see. Like I say, I'm not a slow learner and I pay attention. I listened up, got to know what people wanted, and made my own network. So that's interesting. Even though he said he practiced in the water and that's why he did it, he'd never done it before. That's funny. So it was a half-truth. So I would be careful about using half-truths in your networking and in building relationships, because trust is a core component on building good relationships. Mackay's maxim, learn from Ali. Service to others is the rent each of us should pay for our room here on earth. Chapter 21. Looks like a lot of lines here. When you work on your network works for you. Network Builder Cards, Part 1. Okay, so it shows a front and a back. I'll put this on the camera and maybe you can see that. It's a little bright. Maybe you can't see that. But there's really on the front of this card. So my mom used to track things on 3x5 or 5x7 cards. That's how she ran her sales business. And networking can be done this way, or you can do it online. But on the front of the card, I'll just give you the information here. It's kind of like the old days. They called it a Rolodex. So it's a name, a home phone number, a work phone number, fax, email, internet, contact, title, company, address, birth date, and place. That's a little sensitive because sometimes that can be used for identity theft, so be careful. Connections. So this is what a lot of people miss. A lot of people miss the ecosystem around an individual. So I think that's something that's worthy of tracking. LinkedIn's good on this because you can see who you're connected to and through, and sometimes it's easier to figure out those connections. So that's the front of the card. The back of the card has education, affiliation, special interests, significant career history, accomplishments, wow, exclamation mark. And so that's how they start the chapter, is this card or the information you should track. A lot of this is available on LinkedIn, but not all of it. So there may be something you capture in a conversation with somebody that isn't on LinkedIn or social media, and you just need a way to capture that. I currently do that. How do I do that? I think I just do that through note-taking apps. So I don't really have a system for that. Things like Evernote, or I'm using Nimbus Note now. But there's tools out there. OneNote, there's no limit. You could use Outlook. It's not complicated, but just have a way to capture the information. You could use paper if you're manual. If you like analog, go for it. Unless you have about 1 gigabyte of available memory on your cranium, you can bring up information on demand. You have to write it down. Pale ink is better than the most retentive memory. I've always used a modified version of the Rolodex card to capture the bits and pieces of hot, vital information I collect about the people I meet. These appear as phrases such as Notre Dame alum, loves to cook, never eats lunch, supports the orchestra, devoted to kids, favorite charity is MAD, divorced twice, and so on. This all adds up to pounds of paper stuffed in my pockets to be transferred to cards, which I could then use right before my next phone call or meeting. It's a lot of work, but with every minute, and every top salesperson who gets to me today knows I don't like monogram shirts, can't stand waiting, talk to my best friend Lou Holtz every week, and don't eat nuts. What does not have to do with closing the sale, just about everything when used at the moment it's needed. But what about individuals like me who are no longer planted in the office that houses the Rolodex? Because we're in cars, on planes, working from hotels, and telecommuting from home, we now need a new set of tools, which is true. I think there's a lot of tools that allow you to do this. Some of them are integrations to LinkedIn. It could be a CRM or something like that. The answer, of course, is software. Here we go. And there are a lot of products out there that can help. Business Week recently ran an article describing 3 different programs: ACT, Goldmine, and UpToDate. All 3 can readily organize the basic name, rank, and serial number type data, as well as maintain a history of every fax and phone call you make to members of your network. They can remind you when it's time to touch bases with them again. Properly primed, Goldmine can even follow up on a sales call to a prospect within a letter, a fax, or an email message at staggered intervals. UpToDate plugs you into the internet, where you can exchange information and swap lists of contacts. Yeah, so there's a lot of these CRM systems now are on the cloud. You can just go out there and you could Google or look on some of the software evaluation sites to find these. But those are some of the desktop softwares that he's mentioning in this book that could be replaced by something that's out on the cloud. I think for many of us, we probably have access to either Google ecosystem or Microsoft. And so I would look at using those tools, either a spreadsheet or perhaps, you could look at using the contact database in either of those systems. But, in fact, I've done, it's interesting. If you go look on my YouTube channel, I've done a video on how to use Google Docs as a networking CRM. So it's really rather kind of interesting. Let's see. These programs are out there just waiting to revolutionize your life. But don't let computer illiteracy become an excuse to procrastinate. I've seen $1 million roundtable members who manage their entire insurance empire from a scribbled in little black book. That's easier said than done. However, when it comes to organizations, for them, networking has always been and continues to be a huge information management problem. Sure, your top salesperson or account executive might know the shoe size of every customer who's ever walked in the door, but what about the other people in the office who have no interaction with that account? Short of the Vulcan mind meld featured in Star Trek, we have always lacked a way to get information out of one person's brain and conveniently deposited in another. The answer again is found in bits and bytes, and team selling is getting a whole lot easier. So yeah, recognize that this author comes from sales, and so he's talking through some sales challenges. And I think networking and sales are pretty synonymous, but many of us are not in the sales business, so these examples might be lost on you. I think the key is here just have a system to track the people and the follow-up, which is key, right? So the action comes in the follow-up. So if you're following up with somebody, have a way to do that, whether that's in your calendar or through LinkedIn message or what have you. Have a way to follow up with people. The answer again is found in bits and bytes. Shockware is a database software engine. Let's see, that allows companies to connect sales reps to team members. I mean, we have Salesforce. Back in the day, a company I worked for had Siebel. I think that's part of Oracle now, if I'm not mistaken, or one of those other companies. But and so these companies are available. Whether by hand or by keyboard, the most important priority is to go forward with the concept. And since you didn't buy this book to be told you need to buy something else, let's get started crafting our own program. Let's start with information you already have. Many of us, that's our mobile device, right? I have mine, it's sitting right here. And so each of us has so much information contained on this mobile device through our social networks, et cetera. And just starting through that list can be somewhat overwhelming. But start with the people you know first. That's always what I always thought about. Okay, who's your center of influence? Who's your last 10 text messages or your last 10 phone calls or your last 10 social media posts or what have you, or notifications. So that's a way to go about it. The first card is you. Pull out your wallet or purse, take out all the business cards you've accumulated. They're not going to do any good in there. So make a nice stack and we'll get back to those later. Take out all the membership cards, put those into one side too. We'll get back to what needs to be doing as we go along. Let's start with just names and addresses. As obvious as these are, they can be tricky. You want to be sure both spellings and pronunciations are correct. In the case of tough names, do it both ways. Spelling, pronunciation, i.e. Bernstein. So one's Stein and one's Steen. Also, you should include any preferred nicknames or casual forms of address you may use. Let's go with the obvious entries first. The folks, the relatives, all your spouse's relatives, all of your kids. If your kids are married, all their in-laws. Pretty soon, it's no longer a family, it's a tribe. Even if you only have 10 names on your list, if each one has only 10 contacts, you're going to have 100 people in your network. Now let's compile your personal business list, your barber, accountant, banker, store owners, dry cleaners, insurance agents. Put a little check mark if you have referred some business to them in the past. For a mind jogger, go through your personal checks and credit card receipts for the year. Do people still write checks? I mean, go through, your online banking would be a good resource too. We're getting to the end of the year here and you're probably going to have to do your taxes anyway. So this is a good time to be proactive with your tax delivery person. What should I be tracking? What should I prepare so that when we get our W-2s at the beginning of the year that we can go and do our taxes with them. So this is kind of a way for you to think through the year, certain events that come up every year. When is that person going to be busy? Well, my tax person is busy for the first quarter of every year. I'm not going to reach out to them and network with them in the first quarter of the year. That's not the time you do the networking. So use your common sense. Let's see. Put a check mark next to the name if you think they might be a particularly good customer. There's no law against mentioning the next time you stop by. I was just going through my checks and I realized I spent over $1,500 with you last year. I guess we're really getting to depend on each other more than I knew. The list is already getting bigger than you thought, isn't it? Along with mother, you have a mother load just waiting to be tapped. Let's see. Okay, so let's get to the personal list. We're talking friends, neighbors, former colleagues, fellow club or church members, all your non-business acquaintances. List the affiliation you have with them. If there's more than one, put a check mark next to the name. More than two, put two check marks next to the name. By this time, I'm sure you can see where this is heading. Not only are you compiling a list, you are segmenting your list. There's the list and there's the A list. And so this is what I advocate people do too, is sometimes you have these names in many different places and you need to have a single source of data. So you pull from social media, your cell phone, the people you know just from Christmas cards and whatnot. And then you put an A next to the people that, you could maybe call at 2:00 in the morning, kind of that he talks about, and not feel weird about that, or vice versa, that you would support them if they called you at 2:00 in the morning. So that's how I do that. In every major fundraising campaign, prospects are rated according to their potential. Why? Because fundraising follows the same 80-20 rule you find in any enterprise. 80% of your business comes from the top 20% of your customers. If you can identify the top 20% of your customers, you always will have a great idea of how to prioritize your time. The top prospects are the A list. The more contacts you have with them, the closer you are to them. The greater the volume of business you have with them, the more you have done for them, the more current and active your connection is, the more check marks you will place opposite their names. The more check marks, the more likely they are to belong on your networking A list. The computer networking today, there's a lot of talk about organizing networks around hubs. Human networks have their hubs too, people who seem to be the key relay stations for advice or access. Learn who the hubs are in your network and on the networks of your key contacts. They're definitely A-list material. It may take a while to do this, but it isn't that difficult. And if you're conscientious, it will be well worth the effort. The last group is the meat and potatoes of your business life. Obviously, there's your boss, and there's your boss's boss. Do people report to you? Include them. Now let's get to your peers. They're even more important than your boss. Why? This cautionary tale will explain. The New York Times reported recently that Stephen M. Waters, a managing director at Morgan Stanley, the ultimate white shoe investment firm, had resigned. Waters had dazzled his superiors during his 8 years at the firm, assembling a glittering list of titles as he climbed the greasy pole of success. It seems, however, that his peers had come to regard him in another light. After heading Morgan Stanley's European investment banking operations, Waters returned to the home office in New York. As he was about to assume his new duties, an article appeared in a trade publication quoting him as saying he would be taking responsibility for the firm's investment banking relationships. Oh, wasn't one of his peers handling that assignment? And hadn't Waters overreached before when he appeared to denigrate a potential acquisition target to Morgan Stanley-like fashion after the deal broke down? His colleagues wasted no time getting the knives out. One said he was ignoring the system and acting very independently. Another added perhaps his view of what his job should be wasn't what the firm thought it should be. Still another really took off. It was absolutely the death knell for him. People went ballistic. People were out to get him. Exit Mr. Waters, who probably could recite entire balance sheets from memory, but who had failed to assign much value to goodwill, the opinion of his peers. The majority of our network will tend to be our peers, economically, socially, professionally, and personally. Privates hang with privates, not with generals. In Hollywood, a producer wouldn't be seen socially with a lowly writer. Writers go to writers' parties and so on, up and down the ladder. Your standing among your peers is probably the single most accurate indicator of the value of your network. Let me say that again. Your standing among your peers is probably the single most accurate indicator of the value of your network. One of my favorite quotes on this subject comes from Conrad Hilton, the hotel mogul. In Be My Guest, he wrote, "The value of buddies was something you learned in the Army when your life depended on how well 100 men carried out their assignments. In the Army, you were only as good as your buddies. Once you complete the list of your own organization, add the customers, suppliers, members of professional or trade groups you belong to, and of course, that stack of business cards we set to one side earlier. Next group. This is interesting. Enemies, competitors, former friends. These people you need to know the most about are the people who can do you the most damage and who might, if things were different, do you the most good. Well, things can always be different. These people can be valuable members of your network. You need a line on them. Who's going to hire you if you're on the street? Your best shot is with the people who know how good you are because you've been slamming them to the pavement all these years. I was once in a tough negotiation on an acquisition. We made the deal even though the lawyer on the other side ran rings around my tiger. The next time around, I hired the guy who had handed me my head on the last deal. And while you're compiling this list, don't forget to include former customers. Randy was a salesperson for one of the leading radio stations in the city. His top account was an upscale downtown department store. And Randy had a good relationship with the store's advertising manager, Glenn. The radio station changed its format to punk rock, and Glenn had to tell Randy that none of his customers was into tattoos and orange hair dye jobs, so he wouldn't be able to advertise with him anymore. Of course, Randy was not too delighted to lose his best account, but he was too smart to burn his bridges. He kept in touch with Glenn, even though he knew he couldn't sell him anything. Some of Randy's fellow peddlers thought he was dumb to keep handing out perks to a guy who'd never run another spot unless bankers started showing up for work with nose rings. Randy had the last laugh. Glenn called him one day and told him he'd quit the job at the department store and tomorrow would be named advertising manager of a large brewery. Do rockers drink beer? This bud's for you, Randy. Okay, that's it for the names. We're halfway home. That wasn't so tough. Mackey's borrowed maxim. All my life, I've only been as good as my associates, and in them I have found my good luck, my fortune. Conrad Hilton. Chapter 22. This isn't the Army. You need more than name, rank, and serial number. Network Builder Cards, Part 2. Here's the rest of the information for each of the entries in your network file. Date. You want to know when you made entry into your idea of how old the information is. Each time you update, cross out the old date and put in the new one. If the update comes as a result of a particular occasion, you should jot that down too. This is where having a running diary or dialogue tracking of information is important. Phone, fax, email, internet, that sort of thing, cell phone number. Phone alone is never enough. I know executives who never answer their phone, but will dash to answer their online email. It's kind of flipped now. So people still kind of don't answer their phones, but everybody's got a cell phone. So I think it's more probable that if you can try to get a cell phone number from people, because it's something that follows them everywhere. So if they leave a company, they lose their email, but they keep, I've had the same cell number for over 20 years. So let's see, title. Keep this up to date for use in correspondence. Acknowledge promotions and job changes as soon as you hear about them. The pat on the back is back. Company. Since the first thing that happens on any piece of correspondence is name, title, company, name, address, and so forth, it's also the first thing the addressee notices. I'm always amazed at how much mail I receive that gets it wrong. Being sloppy about these details makes a terrible first impression and greatly diminishes the impact of the message in the letter. Now, some of us may be thinking, well, geez, does anybody send mail anymore? Yes, and you should too, because how often do you receive a personal note in the mail? I would say I get one maybe 2 times a year at the most. And so they stand out to me. And I remember those positively because I don't get many of those. Do I get a lot of email? Yeah, I delete probably 90% of it without ever reading it. hopefully no. Well, outside of my work email. So I will say that I read most of all of my work emails unless it's obvious spam. Address, keep it up to date. When a company changes addresses, sending a short congratulations on your new office note is a great way to stay in touch. It also sends the message that you are well organized. I haven't figured out just yet how larger companies, if I send somebody mail at a company and they're working from home, how it gets there. So that may be something, if you can find a way to find that out, that'd be great. And unless you know somebody personally, I think finding their address is going to be rather challenging. So the best chance you have is to send it to their office. If they're there. If they're not, it's okay. They'll probably see it at some point. Birth, date, and place. We make a special effort to make a pit stop on our buyers' birthdays. You wouldn't believe how much business we write up on those days. I'm a stickler for birthdays, but so are a lot of other people. Therefore, I get the additional differentiator, the birthplace. For years, I'd had a nodding acquaintance with a very successful person I wanted to get to know better, but who seemed totally unapproachable. Then I found out he came from a tiny town of 800 on the Minnesota Iron Range, near the town where my mother was born. Once again, the Iron Range connection proved to be a gold mine. As was typical of small town, these two had been really great rivals. The next time I saw him, I said, "I don't care what you think, Cal, but my mother used to call me that Virginia." used to tell me that Virginia could beat Orr in any game, any day of the week. I watched the expression on his face change from its normal minus 40 degree state to bafflement to a wide grin. "You devil," he said. "I know about you. You've been reading that damn Who's Who anyway. Who's Who again." Totally true. It's a source of information if the person you're interested in has achieved a certain degree of prominence. Connections. This is the place to jog your memory as to where you met somebody, who introduced you, the name of mutual friends, what activity you shared, and when you last saw one another. So that's like a running list of connection and contact. Family names and information about people in your network are important to you because they are important to them. Learn the names, but be very, very careful. I know I have said this before, but I don't think it can be stressed enough. With so many marriages ending in divorce, nothing is more awkward than showing off your presumed knowledge by asking about a spouse by name, only to hear that long, icy silence that precedes, "Muffy and I are no longer married." It also can be unsettling to find out someone has passed away without your hearing about it. So tread lightly. Education. Many people feel deeply attached to the schools they attended, particularly college, even decades after graduation. Here's where they began their adult lives and may even have met their spouses. That's why education, although it is an affiliation, gets its own line. LinkedIn's a good spot for that. Affiliations. This includes memberships in professional organizations, churches, clubs, and political groups. I've met people all over the world and developed some wonderful friendships and contacts based on a mutual membership in an organization. Sometimes that stuff isn't published unless you're actually a member. So capturing that information would be really critical to your success. It's a great conversation starter and a reason to stay in touch that can last a lifetime. Special interests. Nothing makes a network sparkle more than an exact handle on what makes other people really happy. You may have already entered it on another line, but do it here too, because this is going to be a line you refer to again and again. Significant career history. This includes brief notes on the big names up or down the ladder and names of former employees. Accomplishments. I really like tracking awards, publications, and achievements because I know how much effort went into them and how much they mean to the recipient. So track their accomplishments. LinkedIn makes that really nice too, because they'll tell you when somebody's gotten an achievement or went back to school and got a degree or what have you. Wow, exclamation point. So I was curious about this one because we mentioned that on the card before. The stuff nobody else ever thought of, but which, if you can pull it off, is unimaginable or unforgettable. I have a buddy named Shapiro who walks by the same dry cleaning place every day on his way to work. Inside the place, visible from the street, is a blackboard where Terry, the manager, posts various instructions to her employees. One day she wrote, "Check and remove all lint. Remember, it's part of your job." Shapiro thought this was highly amusing, so when he brought in a couple of shirts one day, he teased Terry, saying, "Remember, remove all lint. It's part of your job." The next day, when he passed by the place, the blackboard had changed. Terry had drawn a big, round smiley face, and under it she had written, "Good morning, Mr. Shapiro." For days, there was Shapiro's day brightener for all the world to see. He loved it. It put a spring in his step and a smile on his face. Finally, Shapiro had a big bouquet of flowers delivered to Terry, who starts my day with sunshine. Well, hell, Terry and Shapiro are never going to enter into a big dry cleaning deal. Shapiro isn't ever going to need to have more than one shirt a day laundered. And before long, the flowers will wilt and Terry will have to change the blackboard. So what? They have made the world a slightly happier, warmer, better place for each other than it was before they gave each other a great big wow. And if that's a network that never yields any other dividend, it's still a great payoff. Mackey's Borrowed Part 2 Maxim by James Michener. The master of the art of living makes little distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his information and his recreation, his life and his religion. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues his vision of excellence at whatever he does, leaving others to decide whether he is working or playing. To him, he's always doing both. Again, that's James Michener. Chapter 23. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work. Now you're done with the grunt work. All you need at this point is a system for keeping it in good shape. Here are some examples. One young consultant has an ironclad rule that he doesn't leave the office in the evening until he's organized whatever he needs to be entered in the Rolodex the next day. So yeah, I mean, for us, it might be data entry. So there is some process to doing that, and keeping on top of that is a good idea. But I've always been an advocate of planning the night before for what you're going to be doing tomorrow. So even though I may not be as disciplined in doing that, I do have an idea. I look at my calendar and kind of get a feel for what's going on the next day before I go to bed. Let's see. Another throws everything she collects for the week into a shoebox near the front door and then empties it out first thing Monday morning. A longtime vendor to Mackay Envelope Corporation has another system. She pulls the cards of all people she intends to contact during the week and places them in little piles on her desk. One pile's for those she wants to visit personally. Another pile's for those she wants to phone. A third pile goes to her secretary, who prepares envelopes so that when she has a spare moment during the week, she can send a handwritten note. My own master file has gotten so big that it has become the mother of all Rolodexes and has given birth to a son of Rolodex that contains just birthdays. That way I can roll through it to an upcoming month and make sure I send a card or make a birthday phone call. Once a month on Sunday, nestled in my den, I try to review my files. Phone in my lap, Rolodexes on my side, I spin to win. I work the phone so hard it gets as hot as a $2 pistol on a Saturday night crap game. I can contact nearly 50 people in one long Sunday session. Notice he's calling on the weekend, a Sunday session. 50 people on a Sunday. TV networks conduct periodic audience surveys to determine who's watching what. About once a year, it's sweeps time at the Mackay Rolodex network. Like the TV ratings, one important purpose of this kind of review is to prune the list to get rid of what's not working. By attrition, by neglect, or maybe by plain poor judgment, there are going to be a few what is this person doing here cards. Time to pull the plug or write a quickie. How are you doing note, and be done with it, over and out. That doesn't mean you throw the card away. It just goes in an inactive file. Anything can happen, including your defunct cards undefuncting. On the other hand, if you don't want to pull the plug, but you've let the wires fray a bit, then invite your neglected networkie to a let's catch up with each other lunch. What's to lose? You'll also want to identify any gaps in your network. Things change. New situations call for new contacts. If my business plan calls for selling more envelopes in Madison, Wisconsin, then I better get to know some people in Madison, Wisconsin. Here's another wrinkle. Color code groups of cards you want to separate by function. Customers are alphabetized behind the red divider. Prospects are alphabetized behind the green. Personal friends and relatives behind the blue, and so on. You can do these kind of significations, color codings, or categorizations in a lot of the CRMs. So if you're doing that, you can do that in Outlook. I'm sure there's a way to do that in Google Docs. I haven't seen it, or Google Contacts. You can do this with dividers, color cards, or plastic card protectors. Rolodex makes all of them. Or you can simply code them as you enter them into your computer. There you go. One last suggestion that might prove helpful. Anytime I make a contact, I make a handwritten entry on the card and note the date. This is particularly handy for those quick shuffles through the deck to determine whom I've been in touch with and whom I haven't been. I've also made a complete copy of my master file, and I keep one at home and one at the office. Now when I add a new card, I make 3, one for each master file and one for Son of Rolodex. Hey, all of these mini ideas are just my way of doing things. You do it your way. I think that's the key, right? Is find something that works for you. The organization principle here is to make it easy enough so that you'll do it and thorough enough that it works. All right, we're almost there. We've got the grunt work done. If you let your mind go as you do it, you'll be surprised at all the ideas that will come to you in expanding and cultivating your network. And you'll be shocked by how many people are overdue for a note, a visit, or a phone call. And you might even feel bad about it. Hey, it's been a while since we talked. Just apologize. Hey, I'm sorry, I haven't kept in touch. We had a great relationship in this context. Just say sorry. Now that the information is organized either in your computer or on paper, you're in a position to use it. It can be your blueprint to success. You can refer to it many times a day. It is a living, breathing document, constantly being added to and updated. For example, anytime you recommend one of your networking members for something, let that person know. I don't know if your son has a job yet, Mary, but I mentioned his name to Paul at the bank, who had told me he's looking for a young assistant. Or the boss was talking about the new assistant manager job to me, and I mentioned your name. I don't know if you're interested, but when I told him about you, he seemed to think you might make a good candidate. Win, lose, or draw, who's going to get frosted to hear that? I would. I'd be excited that somebody referred me like that. And I love referring people like that. If you've got something good to say about someone, say it and make a note of it too. You don't have to be an anonymous donor, even though you want to do good. You want to do well too. Networking is networking. Toot your own horn. I think some of us miss that, right? Some of us are so dogmatic about asking questions and gathering information that we don't ever share with anybody. And I'm in that category. I'd prefer to give than to get. That's just my nature. And so I have work to do there, tooting my own horn. I'd rather expose positively and promote other people. So let's see. Toot your own horn. Win, lose, or draw, networking, toot your own horn. No one else will do it for you. If you don't, no one just laid the groundwork for a return favor. Elmer sold lumber. Elmer's lumber was kiln dried and cost more to store. As a result, his stuff was always more expensive than anyone else's. Still, Elmer always outsold his competition because he spent as much time promoting his customers, the builders, as he did promoting his own goods. And they knew it. Elmer was such a factor in their success that when he died, a couple of those builders and an architect worked for them almost went out of business. So there we go. Sharpen your edge. Mackay's maxim: keeping a Rolodex, a contact database, is a lot like getting dressed in the morning. It doesn't matter so much how you do it. It just matters that you do it. Chapter 24. Let's see how much more we got. Now let's just take a cut there, and we'll pick up the rest of step 4 and start into step 5 next week. So thanks again for joining us here today on Career Happy Hour as we do a little book club. I like to do some of these during the holidays so that we can at least have some context, some interaction. And when you need support or have a question, put that in the chat or the comments. I'm happy to answer anything related to career development, planning, networking, LinkedIn, anything of that nature. Put that comment in the chat, and often I'll address it either in a future Career Happy Hour or I'll respond to you directly in the comments. All right. Have a great weekend, everybody. And we'll see you next Career Happy Hour. Bye now.